Welcome back to SSCPA Tax Educate. I hope you had an opportunity to learn a lot about the history of taxation and about how tax laws are formed and some of the basic terminologies in our prior two episodes. I am Dr. Stevenson, or if you like to call me Dr. S, that's what my students call me. We're also encouraging you to become a part of the SSCPA family. Join our family. Like, subscribe, and share this podcast with all your families and friends. Again, we're talking about taxes. Of course, the cliche is there are only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. Of course, our goal is to educate you on tax issues and how they affect your socioeconomic position and your families directly or indirectly. And as with every episode, our goal is to let you have a great learning experience during each of our episodes. We are going to continue to drop each episode each week. At the end of our episodes, you can ask questions. We plan to answer those in our short clip episodes on our social media pages, Instagram, Facebook, and during the subsequent episode. So it's time for Hot Topics. I bet you cannot tell us what hot topics we're going to talk about today. So many of you have been hearing about the One Big Beautiful Bill and the related 2025 governmental shutdown. The One Big Beautiful Bill, or we call it the OBB Act, HR 1 of the 119 Congress, was passed into law last year. It was signed into law by President Trump. And it was a bill that was promised to reduce taxes, reduce or increase spending for various federal programs, increase the statutory debt limit, and address agencies and programs throughout the federal government. Let's introduce some of those concerning aspects of the bill. So rather than reduce a lot of things, it actually also increased a lot of things like the debt limit, as I noted before. Proponents and opponents of the bill have observed that some will benefit while others will not benefit from the policies included in the bill. Nevertheless, we observe that the impact of such a policy will vary on each of us as taxpayers. So what's the biggest issue? One of the biggest issues, though, was the fact that it kind of essentially killed the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which is commonly known as Obamacare. Accordingly, millions of taxpayers lost their health insurance, and also millions of taxpayers have had to repay the premium tax credit. I've seen that with some of our own clients this year. A lot of them had to repay because, of course, those subsidies were not extended because of this bill. So, results of independent researchers and analysts from several organizations have suggested that most of the benefits of this bill skew towards the wealthy. Kiplinger, for example, also reported on the results of their opinion polls of this bill. They conclude that more Americans oppose this bill than those who support it. We'll be returning to this topic for several episodes, so stay tuned to that. Now, let's get into our main lesson for this week. How do the two political parties in this United States perceive taxation and all the related socioeconomic contexts? So we're going to talk about that. So as you know, the two political parties in this country, major parties, are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, commonly known as the GOP. So they view taxation differently. Democrats generally view taxation as a tool for progressive actions, for retribution and funding social redistribution, and funding social programs, while the Republicans, they tend to see taxation as a mechanism to promote economic efficiency. There's just a little nuance there and a difference. Economic efficiency normally rises to the fact where if you are rich enough and you can provide jobs for people who are not as rich, then that's okay. So you shouldn't have to pay the taxes, but the person who is working for you should be paying the taxes because you're providing the job. So business investment is also a part, and then also because of their concept of limited government, they also see taxation differently. Both perspectives reflect the socioeconomic philosophies about the role of government, the role of market, and of course, the role of our economic system here in the United States, which is not which is not really democratic. It's more of who the powers that be, as I noted also in episode 1. If the powers that be sets the laws, then the powers that be can use those same laws for the people or against the people. So it's not necessarily that it's being used against the people, but that's kind of the perception of some people. They feel like it's not working for them. Like right now in today's society, we're saying the economy isn't working for us. When you hear somebody say that commonly, that's kind of what they mean. It's working against them. So Democrats typically frame taxation as a way to strengthen the social safety net of people. And they look at it as, well, we need to reduce inequality and ensure that those with higher income contribute more. So they should pay more. And this is also a historic fact. We discussed this a little bit when we discussed the history of taxation in our first episode. So what are the core beliefs here? The core beliefs of the Democratic Party is progressive taxation. Higher earners and the corporation should pay higher rates to fund the public good in general. So in other words, typically they lean towards more of a European socio-economic system. Then they also believe in redistribution of wealth. And a lot of people don't like that, where taxes finance programs such as healthcare, education, and other social welfare for the less fortunate. They also believe in the IRS enforcing the tax laws, like the laws we discussed, the revenues, the rulings, all of those things that we discussed in episode 2. So if you missed episode 2, please go back and read that and listen to that and kind of understand a little bit more about that. So the Democratic Party believe in IRS enforcing all of these laws, and they want the IRS to close the tax loopholes or tax gaps. A loophole is really a way that you can get through not paying taxes. We'll talk more about this in another episode, but I'll mention it right now. There's what we call tax evasion, which is really bad, and tax avoidance. Tax evasion is what will land you in jail, but there's tax avoidance through loopholes, the loopholes that we're mentioning here. So the Democrats always say close the loopholes. We don't want those loopholes. We don't want easier way for the rich not to pay taxes. Then there's corporate tax. They believe that corporations should pay a maximum amount of tax. Right now, a lot of corporations pay less tax than an individual. So corporate taxes right now are just about 18%, but with all the loopholes, they can be paying much, much less than that. And so wealth and minimum tax. The Democrats' proposal includes wealth taxation or minimum tax on billionaires. And for example, last year, one of our senators proposed a 2% tax on billionaires, and they're saying that will pay for a lot of things. So the Democrats tend to emphasize income inequality as a structural problem requiring government intervention. Public investment. They want us to invest in infrastructure, in education, in healthcare, and to drive long-term growth overall. They also focus a lot on middle and lower income households. They're saying they should be the primary beneficiaries of tax credit and social programs. And if you think about it, the middle class are the people who are funding the government. We are the ones, the middle class, pay the most tax because, again, the poor don't pay taxes, and then the rich find the loopholes not to pay taxes. So that's just a little nugget for you to think about. So the Democrats also talk about that evidence that economic performance have been historically stronger on the Democratic presidents, which they say that that's a lot of facts to back that up. Normally, they said when the Republicans mess things up, we clean it up. So that's their opinion about that. So How do the Republicans perceive taxation? The Republicans, or the GOP, they generally view taxation through more of a supply side, a pro-business lens, we said, arguing that lower taxes stimulate investment, job creation, and economic job growth. Now let's think a little bit about this. So they say that when corporations pay less tax, the corporations can reinvest that money in their corporations to grow, and then they can turn around and hire more people, and then those people can work and get themselves off welfare, for example, if they're on welfare before. So that's kind of one of their core beliefs. They also believe in lower tax. So whenever you hear any representative from both parties, they're arguing about this, is usually, well, we want, the Republicans always put forth, well, we are the ones who cut taxes. And that's always their rallying cry, or their political cry. We're going to lower your tax. So whenever there's an election, you'll always see that. And so they believe in reducing individual taxes and corporate tax. And they think that is better when you keep your money and then you can use it how you want to use it. But where does that leave the lower middle class or the poor, those who cannot afford, who can't work for whatever reason due to illness, etc., can't afford their lives? They need to be helped some way, somehow. The Republicans also believe in limited government, or they used to, small government, that government should not intervene in the markets. It should be minimal, but we don't really see that in today's government. We see a lot more governmental intervention in companies, etc. They also believe that prosperity comes from private enterprise, meaning everybody should be able to go out there and start a business, which could be a good thing if you can afford to do that, and if you're entrepreneurial, etc. But not everybody can afford to start a business or afford to be entrepreneurial. They also believe in lower corporate tax, and they also believe in domestic investment, and they discourage offshoring of investment. So basically, simply, the Republicans often advocate for a simpler tax code, fewer deductions, and they want your taxes just to be written on a one piece of paper, which some people may say that would be a good thing. They also believe in permanent tax cuts. Stability, the tax policy is viewed as a key to long-term business planning, so they always want permanent tax cuts. They don't want the taxes to be raised. From the socioeconomic context, the Republicans tend to emphasize economic growth that's driven by the private sector. They want market efficiency, and they don't want redistribution of wealth. In other words, I should not work to pay for your life. So they don't have that kind of structure in their minds where each one should help each other's. It's more like everybody should be there and help themselves. There's concern about deficits, primarily when tied to spending increase than to tax cut. They look at business owners and investors that are central, like I said before, to job creation. So if we were to do a side-by-side comparison, you can literally see the differences in how their understanding of taxes affect each of our economic situations here. So why does the difference exist? We'll get back to the summation in a minute. But these differences, the divide reflects the different economic philosophies. It's always about a philosophy. Democrats see taxation as a corrective tool. That's the philosophy for inequality, and a way to fund the collective good. Technically speaking, more of a social perspective. The Republicans see taxation as a constraint on economic freedom, and they don't want that. They figure the government should not be a part of your life per se, and that should be minimized. Unleash the power of the private sector is normally how they look at things. So let's talk a little bit about how linking this back to the history of taxation, what happened, why both parties kind of ended up with these different or these varying philosophies? Well, the history of the United States, and if you have not yet heard our episode 1, you can go back and listen to that so that you get caught up into the history. So the history of the US, the different parties had different philosophy. It's essential in understanding that the story of how the Democrats and the Republicans developed this distinct economic identity were shaped by wars, industrialization, inequality, and shifting voter coalitions. When you think about it, there was a structural timeline that was grounded in to show us really how the parties kind of shifted their worldview. So the Democrats moved towards a progressive taxation and redistribution, while the Republicans evolved towards lower taxation. And these philosophies kind of hardened during the 20th century, meaning in the 1900s, right? Like right after World Wars I and II. And again, all of that happened sometime before 1913. We discussed this in our first episode, that in 1913 was the first time we had like a specific change in our constitution that led to the more modern economic and tax structure. So the federal revenue became mostly from tariffs and exercise before 1913, and then after that we had this whole concept of income tax became a part of our society because we wanted to understand how we could fund all the wars. We needed more money. So now before that, there was no federal taxation. It was all state taxation, property tax, all that good stuff. And then all of a sudden, the federal government was able to start implementing their own taxation structures. So we had the debates during that time. Democrats wanted to support lower tariffs while Republicans wanted higher tariffs. And you can see that even in today in our current administration, the whole debate continues even now, over 100 years, about tariffs. Tariffs are bad, tariffs are good. The United States Supreme Court ruled recently that tariffs are a tax, which we know, on consumers. And so they struck down the current administration tariffs, executive powers on tariffs, because they were considered unconstitutional and illegal. But again, in the early 1900s, Democrats explicitly favored the income tax, calling it the fairest way to ensure wealth, and they did not like the proportionate share of the federal burdens, etc. So again, we look at all the wars and all that happened. So that's kind of an overview of how both parties see the taxes and why it is so important to understand that, because it depends on who is in power. That will tell us how our taxes are going to be spent. So the role of taxation, Democrats, again, they want to fund social program. They want to reduce inequality. The Republicans want to promote growth and limited government. In terms of the tax structure themselves, Democrats have a progressive structure where they want higher rates for the wealthy. The Republicans want lower rates for the wealthy. They have a broad cut of individuals and business. In terms of corporate tax, Democrats want to raise rates to fund programs. Republicans want to lower rates to spur investment. And in terms of IRS enforcement, the Democrats want to increase the funding and audits of citizens, while the Republicans don't believe a lot in regulations, so they want to reduce regulations. The economic philosophy, basically redistribution and public investment, while the Republicans look at, oh boy, it's about a supply and growth and market efficiency. And in terms of target and who benefits, middle and lower income households tend to benefit more from the Democratic Party's understanding of taxation, while businesses, investors, and higher earners tend to benefit more from the Republican philosophy. So that's a little bit of both. You can always ask your questions on this topic. If you want to delve more into any specific area, we are willing to answer those specifically. But please do not forget to like and share this podcast and become a part of our family. And again, remember, this is an educational platform, so we will respond to constructive questions and comment. And tune in next week when we are going to talk about how to deal with the IRS, meaning how do we as taxpayers deal or communicate with the IRS, because it's really difficult to do that. So I will see you next week.